Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to another episode of the Katerji Show. My name is Katerji, and this is my show. Thanks everyone for joining us for another episode. It's been a wild few weeks. We've been running the show now. We've more than doubled our YouTube followers. So if you're watching along on YouTube, thanks so much. You're really helping us grow. If you've enjoyed the content, please do like and subscribe and put a comment in if you have any questions or if you have any ideas for future shows. Really good to hear from you. Another episode of the Katerji Show. My name is Katerji, and this is my show. Bear with me, just having some technicals, right? So it's really great to have you all joining us again. Without further ado, today is a rather momentous day for British and Palestinian politics, in that the British government has just announced that it is about to recognize Palestine for the first time. So a formal recognition of the state of Palestine. Don't worry too much about the caveats being put forward by Sir Keir Starmer. They're basically just laying the groundwork for why the decision is coming now. That's my position on it. But we have a special Palestine episode for you. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce my guest, Martin Shaw, Dr. Martin Shaw. So without further ado, I will introduce our guest. Hello, Martin.
Hi, Oz. Good to be with you.
One question I do have really is, can you tell us a bit about you? You are the author of a book called Is Genocide? You've written multiple books on the topic of genocide. So could you give us a bit of a background as to who you are and what your expertise is?
I have been working as an academic on issues related to genocide for 25 years now. I started out being interested in questions of war, but then I became aware that really one can't talk about war in the modern world without also talking about genocide. And I got into the debate.
So I read your article that you recently published in New Lines magazine, in which you set out your case for why you think what's happening in Israel and Palestine is a genocide. So we'll just jump right on in there into the sort of, the controversial elements of this. I should disclose when we start this that I am pro-Palestine. I have been involved in pro-Palestine activism throughout much of my early life, especially. So I want to disclose that up front in any kind of discussion that we have together. And I think myself, I concluded the same as you, that I believe that Israel has met that threshold in Gaza.
I think the basic issue is that from the start of Israel's response to what Hamas did in October 2023, which of course was a terrible series of massacres, which themselves raised questions of genocide, what Israel did was from the start to not only try to destroy Hamas as a group, but also really to try to destroy Palestinian society in Gaza. If they were simply fighting Hamas, they would never have carried out the kind of destruction which they did. They deliberately broadened all the boundaries of what their military could do, and they unleashed enormous destructive power. The most intensive killing took place in the first few weeks. They showed very early on that they wanted to kill tens of thousands of Palestinians, to destroy the infrastructure of Gaza, to destroy the healthcare system. All this was very apparent really within days and certainly within weeks of October 2023. And I came to the conclusion very early on that this was what Israel was doing, that they were committing a genocide in the sense that they wanted to eliminate the Palestinian society in Gaza. They wanted to reduce the Palestinians there to a miserable, subhuman level of life, really.
So, look, I'm coming at this from a position of much agreement with you, but for the sake of debate and trying to bring this forward in a kind of academic manner, I'm going to play devil's advocate for much of this and put to you the questions that your critics might be willing to put forward. But again, I wanted to disclose that at the start of how I personally feel. One of the points that I wanted to start with, that again, and you've already brought this up, interestingly, as you did in the start of your article, is that you basically accuse Hamas of genocidal acts on October 7th. So you're not going to be winning, huge amounts of allies from, the highly partisan people in this debate. So talk us through why, the language you use. Let's just focus on October 7th for now, and then we will start moving into the campaign in Gaza and beyond.
Well, of course, October 7th was really Hamas's attempt to break out of the blockade which Israel had imposed on Gaza, which already was creating very difficult conditions of life for the people in Gaza. We're hearing a lot today about starvation. But even in years before October the 7th, the Israelis had been restricting the flow of food into Gaza. But people weren't starving. People were short of certain foods. There was a generally very restricted condition of life, but people were not starving. They were not living in the sort of terrible conditions that they are today. So what Hamas did was an attempt to break out of this. But of course, they broke out of it by attacking civilians as well as the Israeli military. If they had simply attacked the Israeli military, that would have been, in international law, that would have been legitimate, because Israel is technically occupying Gaza. That is the international legal situation, and they have the right to attack Israel. But they do not have the right to attack Israeli civilians. No armed actor has the right to attack the civilians. And that is what Hamas did. And of course, they did it in a very brutal way. Hundreds of young people were killed at a music festival. Hundreds more were killed in various attacks on kibbutzim in southern Israel. So I use the language of genocidal massacre because that's a language that's been developed by scholars to describe acts which are genocidal in character, but which are of a limited duration and scope. In this case, Hamas were simply carrying out those acts on this one day. It was a terrible day or a terrible 48 hours perhaps for Israelis in the south of the country, but it was not an all-out genocide. In contrast, of course, Israel is an enormous, powerful state with a very advanced military, and it was able to use great power immediately, a great destructive power, and to launch this campaign with no end. So we're nearly 2 years now, and Israel has been bombing Gaza for almost all of that time, apart from a couple of short ceasefires, and restricting the flow of essential goods into Gaza. All the terrible things.
So I just want to bring you back there onto that point, because again, we will move into that immediately after this question. But from the Israeli perspective, they will argue, well, just because Hamas doesn't have the infrastructure to commit atrocities on the scale of a state doesn't mean that they don't have the intention to do so, and therefore any military campaign to destroy Hamas is legitimate because, by your own admission, they are trying to commit genocide or committing genocidal acts against the Israeli population.
They were carrying out massacres of Israelis in the south of the country. That is a limited form of genocidal event in my way of thinking. But that doesn't give Israel the right to commit genocide in return. Genocide is illegitimate. In international law, there is no excuse for committing genocide. So even if an armed organization has massacred some of your people, that does not give you any right to attack the civilians of the other side, let alone to carry out the sort of campaign that Israel has done over this long period.
I think we both agree with the basis of that, but the question was more specifically about Israel's argument will be that Gaza, that hosts Hamas, and Hamas has genocidal intent towards Israel, and therefore their military, again, the Israeli government doesn't see themselves as committing a genocide, or at least certain elements of it do. Certain elements seem very happy to brag about it in public. I'm talking about, the far right Kahanist members that have made very, very overtly genocidal statements that I think we can and will go into. Again, we're going to dedicate most of the show to that element of it. Yeah. But again, I just wanted to dig into just on the point of justification that any military has for engaging in any particular argument. Well, there is a concession that Hamas as an entity for Israel is one that they feel threatened by the very existence of.
Well, yes, although I should think that people in Gaza have a right to feel even more threatened by Israel, the state of Israel. Hamas is not capable of inflicting terrible damage on Israel. The only reason that they were able to do what they did in October 2023 was because Israel had let its guard down. Israel had the means to prevent that. Israel had most of its troops in the West Bank. It didn't have sufficient troops even just to defend its border in southern Israel. And the reason it had all those troops in the West Bank was because it was protecting the settlers who were terrorizing the Palestinians in the West Bank. So if Israel wasn't engaged in this kind of settler terrorism and attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank, it would have been able to defend itself easily. It would have been able to prevent Hamas breaking through, and if Hamas had broken through, it would have been able to repel them very quickly. But it wasn't prepared for that. It is far too confident of its own position of power, and therefore it didn't believe that any Palestinian organization could carry out a serious attack in the south. It thought it had Hamas under control, and so it indulged itself in the West Bank and paid this terrible price for that. That's the first thing, really. Israel supporters talk about self-defense. They could easily have defended themselves, but they weren't looking to defend themselves. They were looking to attack Palestinians elsewhere in Palestine, in the West Bank. The second point, I think, is that if Israel had wanted to simply to defeat Hamas, it could have attacked the Hamas in Gaza in a very different way. Israel has enormously sophisticated weaponry. It has a very, very highly professional, trained military. It can do precision attacks when it wants to. But what it wanted to do here was to punish the whole population of Gaza, down to the last child, the last woman, for what Hamas had done in southern Israel. And that really is, there is no defense for that in international law. There is no justification. And we have seen now 2 years of this terrible destruction. And it really has destroyed the reputation of Israel as a democratic state.
So, yes, I mean, look, I wanted to dive into your view on this, basically, to set out your case. You said this very early on in October 2023. You were of this opinion. So that will, again, and that means you are quite early as far as other genocide scholars are concerned. There have been other genocide scholars who have spoken out on this topic who came to this conclusion much later on in the campaign than you. Indeed, yes. And again, let's not try to pick too many holes in the reasons as to why there were differences in timing for when people made their interventions. But I wanted to get your case in a kind of academic way. I know it's very difficult to talk about these kinds of subjects, in a way that sort of divorces it from the incredible amounts of emotion that is rightly attached to it. But, the one thing that I really want to point out as well, and I think this is really, really, really key, is that even if you conclude that what is happening in any conflict isn't genocide, that doesn't necessarily mean that war crimes or crimes against humanity aren't being committed that don't reach the threshold of genocide. And genocide is a specific legal threshold that we're talking about here. It doesn't mean the be all and end all. And some people think that the only example of genocide is, for example, the Holocaust, where there were mass death camps and so on. Whereas there have been many other examples of genocides in history that have been ruled by the international community to be genocide that haven't been at the level of mass extermination that the Nazis had managed to put out. So just because something isn't a genocide doesn't mean that it's not equally as condemnable, but this is a specific legal argument that is being made. And I have to come at this from my own perspective as a correspondent over the course of my career. I have been much more liberal with the term genocide than some of my colleagues have, and I have felt that threshold has been met in other parts of the world in ways that my colleagues disagreed with bitterly at times. And as a result, there were very emotional discussions surrounding that. So I know how difficult these topics are to discuss. But again, I really wanted to get into the real academic argument for why you think this threshold has been met in this instance. And also, if you could add, I suppose, why you came to this reasoning earlier in your thoughts than other people who had been watching the conflict maybe as often as much as you have.
Well, maybe I'll deal with the first point first, and then get into the if you like, the conceptual definitional arguments. The reason that I identified it early was really were two reasons. One was that I had been following the Israel-Palestine conflict, and I had been following what Israel had done in the earlier wars in Gaza and in Lebanon and elsewhere, where they had adopted a policy summarized in the Dahia Doctrine, the idea that you use disproportionate force against civilians to respond to armed attacks by groups like Hamas. And we had seen this in the previous wars in Gaza. We had seen terrible killing and destruction, the whole neighborhoods razed. Hundreds, even thousands of people killed in single episodes. So, and this had happened when what Hamas had done had been things like firing rockets into Israel with small numbers of deaths. So my reasoning was in October 2023 that this attack that Hamas had made was on a far bigger scale, and it had caused far more civilian casualties than anything they'd done before. Therefore, it was almost certain that Israel would respond with an exponentially increased level of force, and that was becoming very clear. It became really clear within days of October the 7th, 2023. It was obvious that this was what Israel was doing, and I think some people were reluctant to apply the label of genocide because of the idea that Israel, as the state of the Jews, which who of course are the historically the sort of prototypical victims of genocide, and who have suffered genocide not only in the Holocaust but at other periods in history, that somehow Israel could not be committing genocide. Well, that isn't how it works. We have a lot of examples in history of groups that have been victimized carrying out atrocities, groups that have suffered genocide. The Serbs, for example, suffered genocide at the hands of the Croatians during the Second World War. They went on to commit the genocide against Croats and Bosnians in Bosnia in 1992 and afterwards. So that I wasn't going to fall for that, if you like, or I wasn't going to be seduced by that in order to from not confronting what was going on. And I felt that we had to confront the fact that Israel was showing it was partly the fact that all their leaders were talking in genocidal terms. I mean, it wasn't just the extreme right in the government, but Netanyahu and the President Herzog and other big figures were talking in genocidal terms. And when the International Court of Justice in January 2024, that's 18 months ago now, the president of the Court of Justice, when she read out their provisional measures against Israel, listed all these statements that they've made. So I put these two things together, really, the statements that Israel's leaders were making and the actions that they were taking against the Palestinians in Gaza, and that's how I came to that conclusion. Now, you're absolutely right. The genocide is a general concept, and it's a legal term. It's also a social and historical term, and it is something which can apply in many different situations. The Holocaust was the original context in some ways, although actually the man who invented the idea of genocide, Raphael Lemkin, who lived in what is now Ukraine, in Lviv, studied there, and who was of Polish Jewish origin. When he talked about genocide during the Second World War, he talked about the Nazi genocide, not only against the Jews, but also against the other occupied peoples, like the Poles and the Ukrainians. And he believed that the genocide was happening not only in the extermination camps and the most extreme violence that the Nazis carried out mainly against the Jews, but also in the other violence which they carried out against the other occupied people. And so we know we're talking about starvation in Gaza today, but Lemkin was analyzing starvation not just among the Jews, but among ordinary Poles in occupied Poland during the Second World War. This is part of what genocide means. Genocide doesn't just mean exterminating, killing people en masse, although that is one form that it can take, but it also means things like reducing them to starvation, crippling their way of life, preventing them from reproducing. There are all sorts of elements of the definition of genocide in law, and if we look at it as a historical perspective.
Sorry. So I understand that you felt this. You felt strongly that this was going to happen, even if Israel's actions hadn't necessarily reached that threshold. It would be difficult to argue 4 or 5 days into the campaign that Israel was already committing a genocide. Your argument, as I'm trying to understand it, is that you believe they had genocidal intent from the start of that campaign in response.
I'm afraid, I believe even 4 or 5 days in, when we were seeing the first enormous destructive bombings of civilian areas and civilian targets, I believe that we were almost certainly witnessing the beginning of a genocide. I mean, obviously, if Israel had stopped after 4 or 5 days, I probably wouldn't have come back and said this is a genocide. But Israel did not stop. Israel had no intention of stopping. Israel was obviously very, very determined to carry out this campaign to the maximum extent. And those first months, October and November, December 2023, as I said, they were the months of the greatest killing. I mean, there've been an enormous number of people killed since, but the killing was at its highest then, and the destruction was of a very catastrophic nature already by the end of 2023, which of course is why South Africa took a case to the International Court of Justice in December 2023. And the court ruled at the end of January 2024 that there was a plausible risk to the rights of Palestinians under the Genocide Convention. That's to say that there was a plausible risk that they were being exposed to genocide, and they ordered Israel to change its way of behaving. They did it in somewhat abstruse ways, I think, and certainly they weren't successful in making Israel change what it was doing, but they took a stand, and so I think anybody who was really watching the situation, all right, maybe in October 2023, you might hesitate to say this is genocide, but by the end of 2023 and the beginning of 2024, we'd had months of this, and the International Court of Justice was giving credibility to this argument. And so I don't understand people, I don't understand some of my fellow scholars who delayed even after that in recognizing genocide, but I don't understand either the responses of governments who, having heard this judgment from the International Court of Justice, and being bound as signatories to the Genocide Convention to prevent genocide, I don't understand their failure to respond to that. Or at least I don't accept their failure. I mean, I understand it as in terms of the way in which Western countries are allied to Israel and therefore were not prepared to break this, to break that alliance, were not prepared to listen to what the ICJ was saying. I understand it at that level, but I don't accept it as a recognition of their responsibilities under international law and their responsibilities, human responsibilities to the people who were suffering in Gaza.
So maybe we can dive into that ICJ thing. I will say that I slightly disagree about the ICJ judgment, and maybe we can dive into why. I think the ICC arrest warrant for Netanyahu is much, much more substantial and much more significant than the ICJ one. And I would argue that, again, it's very difficult to ignore that one, and there should be action based on the existing nature of or as a British person, as our government's relationship with the government of the State of Israel. The ICJ argument will be that, again, I'm arguing from a perspective of trying to find holes in your argument for the purpose of debate, not because I disagree with you. But the argument around the ICJ will be that they are saying that basically the threshold has been met so the case can be heard, that there is that it's not completely outside of the realms of possibility that a genocide could be committed by Israel against Palestine under certain conditions. That to me seems a much lesser threshold for the court case to be heard, rather than any kind of summary judgment that a genocide is taking place. It's saying that within the realms of possibility, this could take place, and therefore we judge it as something worth substantially investigating. Which is, again, you would kind of see governments allied with Israel as saying, well, that this isn't a ruling, this is just a court case, and we would treat innocent until proven guilty kind of thing. So I think the arrest warrants for Netanyahu are very different, and again, it's interesting with South Africa, and maybe you could give us some thoughts on this too, given that they were so hesitant to execute an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin by the same court, are the ones that are bringing forward this case to the ICJ. So, let's go into that ICJ case in detail.
Well, you've brought in lots of different things here, and I would like to talk about all of them, actually. But the ICJ case, first of all, it's true that the ICJ has not ruled that Israel has committed genocide. But it would never do that for a number of years. The procedures for ruling that a country has committed genocide are complicated and laborious, and they always take years. It took 14 years for the Bosnian government to get a judgment when it brought a case against Serbia. So that gives you an idea of the timescale. But what the ICJ did do, and they would not have done if they had not been seriously concerned that there was a risk, a very serious risk that genocide was happening, is that they issued provisional instructions to Israel, which said that Israel had got to make sure that it respected the rights of Palestinians under the Genocide Convention. And in particular, it had to make sure that it allowed sufficient humanitarian supplies into the Gaza Strip. And on two levels really there. One, they are saying the terms of the Genocide Convention are at issue here. And two, they are saying there are specific things which you need to do to make sure that you are not breaching the Genocide Convention. And of course, Israel ignored the first and also ignored the second, and we're seeing the consequences of that today. So that doesn't mean that governments are off the hook. The fact that this is a provisional, other governments, the governments of states that have signed up to the Genocide Convention are bound to prevent genocide as well as to punish it. And if an international court is saying that there is a serious risk, that should set alarm bells ringing in any governments which take the Genocide Convention seriously. And I find it difficult to think of a single Western government that came out after the International Court of Justice ruling, the first ruling, or the second ruling, or the third ruling, and said, look, we need to take this seriously. There is a risk of genocide here. We need to do something about it. They didn't respond in those terms. So they have been in default on their obligations under the Genocide Convention. So that's what I'd say about the ICJ. About the ICC, I think you're right that the ICC cases are very, very important. Although the ICC has not charged Netanyahu with genocide, it has charged him with war crimes and crimes against humanity. It has also said, the judges said when they issued the arrest warrant for Netanyahu and his colleague, they said that Israel was committing a systematic attack on the civilian population of Gaza. So he wasn't just committing this war crime and that war crime and this crime against humanity and that crime against humanity. It was committing a systematic attack. And that really actually suggests genocide. That's what genocide is. Genocide is a sort of comprehensive term for an overall attack by a state or an armed organization against a civilian population. And that is what I think that's what the court was recognizing. But the charges which were brought, and of course at the head of the ICC's charges was the crime of starvation as a crime against humanity and a war crime. And that was the key thing in the ICJ judgments as well. Those things really bring to head the responsibility of Netanyahu for what amounts to a genocide in Gaza, and what we are seeing the realization of today. I mean, the fact that 18 months after those instructions were given by the ICJ, a year after the ICC prosecutor first brought his charges, we are seeing people starving in significant numbers in Gaza. We are seeing a whole population which is hungry. Everything adds up to a comprehensive policy of harm to the civilian population.
Sorry, yeah, I know I have it.
You also actually, can I just?
Yeah, carry on. Yeah,
you talked about the countries which have failed to stop to arrest Putin. Although of course Putin didn't actually go to South Africa.
You're correct,
because he was worried about it. I think there is a double standard here. There is the problem that the ICC has indicted Putin as well as Netanyahu, and countries which respect international law should try to arrest both of them. And we have some countries which want to execute the warrants against Netanyahu but not against Putin, and others the other way around who want to arrest Putin but not Netanyahu. So we have in close to where you are in Warsaw, we have a government which when we had the 80th anniversary of Auschwitz liberation earlier this year, blocked Putin from traveling, but said that it would welcome Netanyahu to come and attend this commemoration. And this is the sort of double standard that we can't have, either from global South countries or from Western countries. There has to be a consistent application of international law and respect for the charges which the ICC have brought against both sets of leaders.
Yeah, I didn't want to dwell too much on some of the hypocrisy coming from Brazil and South Africa, but again, I do think it's important that we at least acknowledge those things if we're going to be talking about this situation. Not as a throat clearing exercise, but there are very real hypocrisies at play here, and just because you agree with, say, South Africa bringing this case doesn't mean you agree with South Africa on a bunch of other issues that it has been, notoriously bad. Sudan is another one that comes to the top of my head. So, look, what you talked about that definition of genocide and systematic, and that's where I came to this conclusion as well. Is that I've accused regimes of systematic human extermination. The Assad regime, I believe, conducted, and the United Nations human rights body also concluded that the Assad regime was involved in systematic human extermination in Syria. And I argued that it was a genocide. It reached that threshold. Friends, colleagues of mine disagreed with me because they didn't see the ethno-sectarian element of the Alawite dictatorship trying to systematically oppress, abuse, dispossess, and murder large parts of the majority Sunni Arab population. Again, I can understand that even if they don't agree with it being termed a genocide, that they still acknowledge that those are war crimes and crimes against humanity. And I think, it's very difficult to look at what the images of starvation coming out of Gaza and not conclude that Netanyahu's government bears significant responsibility for that, which could reasonably amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. The question of genocide is a much more difficult one. As you said, it took 14 years for the Bosnians to take their case to completion. And again, I will argue that some of the people now loudly calling for international prosecutions in the case of Israeli leaders, something I do agree with, are people who themselves may have opposed the international tribunal in the former Yugoslavia, and so on. So what is this definition of genocide that you think, not just the dictionary definition of in whole or in part, but the broader academic definition that, say, not just yourself but scholars like Lemkin and so on would have concluded? Because they would have argued that the Holodomor was a genocide, and again, some people would heavily dispute that forced famine is a genocide. But if you're arguing that the Holodomor is a genocide, that mirrors very closely with what the charge is against Israel now, surely, with what they're doing in Gaza specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think this is well, there are a lot of issues here. The starting point really is Lemkin's ideas, and he formulated the core idea really that genocide, although he didn't even call it genocide before the Second World War, but he was writing about it 10 years before. Genocide is the holistic destruction of a group. It's where a state or another armed actor uses all kinds of different means to destroy a population group, an ethnic or national group, or maybe some other sort of group. And this was his idea really, that we. So in this way, this is how it's different from war crimes and crimes against humanity, which are a set of specific crimes. Lemkin was saying there is a general crime here, which these specific crimes are a part of. It is the crime of a state which wants to destroy a population or a national group, and that's what the crime is. So in the Genocide Convention, that was defined in legal terms as the key idea really in both Lemkin's and the Convention's definitions, and in most academic definitions, is really the deliberate destruction of a group. It's the fact that it's intentional, it's deliberate. It's not something that happens by accident. So a famine, if the famine originated from natural causes, that would not be genocide if that was all there was to it. The reason I think that people say that the famine in Ukraine and elsewhere in the early 1930s was a genocide is that because the Stalinist regime exacerbated that famine. It deliberately restricted the supply of food. It confiscated food from the peasants while it was exporting it elsewhere. and it left people to starve as a matter of deliberate policy. And there have been many other cases of that in colonial situations, in communist China under Mao and elsewhere. So it's something which, and as I said earlier, it's something which Lankin wrote about in the context of Nazi policy in Europe in the early 1940s during the Second World War. So it is a big part of genocide. It's not, you don't find actually in the Genocide Convention, it doesn't specifically mention the word famine or starvation, but it does talk about inflicting on a group conditions of life designed to bring about its destruction in whole or in part. And that's really, I think, the clause which we come back to time and time again in the convention when we are looking in legal terms at whether what Israel is doing in Gaza or other states, such as those you mentioned, are doing when we allege they're committing genocide.
So look, one thing I definitely don't want to do with this conversation with you is throw at you examples of what the IDF claims it's doing, because again, I have colleagues, friends on the ground. I've known people in Gaza for many years. I've been to Gaza myself. I know many reporters who are covering it. I have very strong sources of information. So I'm not going to just repeat these IDF arguments about aid distribution that are just pure state whitewashing their own actions. So again, I'm not going to reduce this conversation to that. But again, I do want to further interrogate why these acts go beyond just the war crimes and crimes against humanity. Again, you could argue that even systematic war crimes and crimes against humanity are the equal of, you know, the crime of genocide, as it were. So why in specific, can you give examples of policies enacted by the Israeli government over the course of the last, 2 years nearly, that you think merit that justification?
Well, what I've been trying to suggest is that really it's when we take everything together that we see that there is a genocidal intent here. It's when we put together the enormous death and suffering and injury caused by the bombing, the destruction of the infrastructure, the deliberate targeting of key elements of civilian infrastructure like hospitals, the restriction of food supply, which has caused the current famine and emerging starvation, is when we put all these things together that we need to ask the question, what is the intention of the Israeli government towards the civilian population in Gaza? And really, it is an intention to destroy their society, destroy them as a group which has any coherence as a group, which has any normal standard of life, any normal conditions of life, and of course is linked to the historic Israeli aim of removing the Palestinians from the area of Palestine in order to expand the area of Jewish control and settlement. And so, in recent months, we have seen, especially since Donald Trump came in and encouraged Israel with this, we have seen them being much more open about their aim of removing the surviving Palestinians from Gaza altogether and exporting them to other countries. They haven't really said which other countries. No other countries have yet said we will take them, but that I think is what they're trying to do. We have this scheme introduced by Israel Katz, the foreign minister, to set up what amounts to a giant concentration camp complex in southern Gaza, and to force these hungry, starving people into this complex, to give them minimum food while they're in that great giant sort of prison, and then to use this as leverage to make them leave Gaza for other places and renounce their right to return to Palestine, so that then Donald Trump can set up his Riviera and the international elite can swan in and holiday on the remains of Palestinian settlements. This is really what it amounts to.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that that some I want to use the word apologist here, basically, for Netanyahu's government, would argue that this is just the view of the fringe radicals. They don't represent the view of the Israeli government, but we're talking about Israeli ministers here who are open Kahanists, who have made their intentions to forcibly expel the population of Gaza very clear in public statements that are easily, checkable yourself. It's it's impossible. And if you're a judge judging a case, a legal case, to say that these ministers who are senior ministers within the Netanyahu coalition are not representative of government policy, government opinion, government actions. So I do think that there is definitely an argument to be made that just because the Netanyahu government says, well, these guys don't speak for the entire. I'm sorry, that doesn't wash with me. It shouldn't wash with the court.
In that particular case, we're talking about the foreign minister, who's one of the most senior ministers in the government, and although it hasn't become official Israeli government policy, that he hasn't been sacked, he hasn't been rebuked. Everything that has been said really by Israeli leaders has supported the general ideas that he's putting forward. I think they're floating these ideas to see if they can get away with it, to see if Trump will buy what they're suggesting, and if they're allowed to, they will probably implement these.
So look, we've got we're in the final stretch of the show now. We've got about 1,700 people watching live. So if you are watching live, thank you so much for following along and watching along with the Oz Katerji show. I know we've had a few audio problems tonight, but again, I really appreciate not just the amount of people that are tuning in to watch, but also just how respectful people are being, that people aren't really being insulting in the chat. And with a topic like this, it really is kind of something that I want to point out, that it could go really badly when putting it out, and everyone's been really well behaved. So I want to acknowledge that and thank people for helping make this discussion a rational and fair one with calm heads, and not an emotive one, which is really what I wanted to try and avoid, despite talking such an emotional topic. So look, I wanted to cast the eye forward. You and I both believe that this is the Israeli government's intentions to forcibly expel the Palestinian population of Gaza. The government's, we are British, the British government is not going to go along with that. The French government's not going to go along with that. Europe is not going to go along with that. The Trump administration is a giant question mark. The statements that Trump has made in the past seem to indicate that he'd be comfortable with it, and he's a man full of internal contradictions. So I don't want to waste time trying to double guess what Donald Trump's position will be. But going forward beyond the Trump administration, there is a bipartisan political consensus in the United States that basically Israel will be the be-all and end-all of the decision for if a Palestinian state is ever recognized. Whereas the Europeans are seeming to finally break with that, waiting for Washington to decide things. We could go back to Oslo and talk about the process and so on and so forth, but we seem so far removed away from that 90s sort of diplomatic push from Washington to try and bring about a resolution to the conflict. We seem decades away from any kind of resolution now, further and further away than we've been at any point in our lifetime. So Israel, presumably, we've established at this point, is going to try to expel that population. It's not going to have many willing partners. So where does this situation go? Does it fester onwards? Do more and more and more people die? What is the limit? Do you believe that Europe finally goes, well, this is our line, this far, no further? What the images of starvation, mass starvation, seem to have had a impact in changing at least the urgency for policy in Western Europe within the last, I want to say, week or so. It's not been it's not been heading in that way with any sufficient urgency over the last few weeks, shall we say. But this has started to bring about a slight policy change. What do you think are basically the next steps here? Not just for Europe, as Europe's concerned, but as you think Israel's concerned, what do you think they're going to attempt to do next?
Well, I think they will do as much as Donald Trump lets them get away with, and that so far, I think I'm less optimistic about Europe than you are. I think it's certainly true that Europe has made some European countries, many European countries have made a significant rhetorical shift in the last few weeks, and especially in the last few days. And I think that they are now feeling they have to put more pressure on Israel. But the bottom line, I think, is that countries like Germany and the United Kingdom are so heavily embedded in Israel's military campaign and its as well as its political campaign, and so reluctant, especially in the case of the UK, to break with Donald Trump, that it's very difficult to see a big shift happening, a shift that will really help the Palestinians in a big way. I think what we're seeing at the moment is Israel making one of its little tactical retreats, slight tactical retreats, and making some gestures towards allowing aid in, and people like Keir Starmer are really desperately trying to set the scene for Israel to make those gestures, and Starmer has not said he will definitely recognize Palestine. He has said he will recognize it if Israel does not withdraw from Gaza and change the situation there in a serious way. It remains to be seen really where Starmer will go with this contradiction he's in, and I think it partly depends on the pressure that he and other leaders are under. I think we are in a situation where our leaders in Europe are still very, very beholden to the US. We've seen it over trade in the last few days. Incredible submission by the European Union to Trump while he's visiting Scotland. So over trade. So Europe and Europe wants Trump to continue to support Ukraine and to support Ukraine more than he has done over the last few months. And for all these reasons, I think that there's a lot of trading off of the plight of the people in Gaza against other political considerations, both like good ones, like the need to support Ukraine, and really bad ones that really. I don't think there is sufficient determination on the part of the major Western countries to support the people in Gaza in a serious way that will actually get us out of this, help to get us out of this fix, because I think that would involve confronting Trump, and I don't really see any major figures willing to do that.
So, look, I wanted to you brought up several really important issues there, but I wanted to pick down into the British instance, because you're absolutely correct about the way Sir Keir Starmer phrased things. And we heard from the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, as well, spell out the position. Now, I interpret the words that he said from a different lens. I try not to read take for granted exactly what politicians are saying and try to reason behind what are they implying they will mean, when the push comes to shove. Israel's not going to withdraw from Gaza. The threat of Palestinian statehood recognition is, again, the question, and I said it at the beginning of the show, the question is, why now? Why is the British government pulling this lever now? And the other part of that is the British government can only pull this lever once. And once it has pulled that lever, if it doesn't change anything, it can no longer use that as a sort of stick versus the carrot approach with response to Israel. Now, from my perspective, as someone who has long campaigned for Britain to officially recognize the state, because I don't think that this sort of diplomatic inertia that has set in basically, since the death of Arafat, or even before that there's been no progress towards any kind of two-state solution. And that failure to move that forward by applying pressure on Israel has basically just emboldened successive Israeli governments to not have to take, we in the 90s and early 2000s, people used to talk about paying lip service to the two-state solution. We're in a political position where people don't even pay lip service to. You don't even hear that term anymore. So it's so rare that the two-state solution is even spoken about by Israeli leaders. It's only ever in response to something a Western leader has said. And I think that is a significant problem, and one that the official recognition of statehood by a British government would, it would be the only real way of putting any kind of pressure on Israel in a sort of policy sense beyond sanctions and much more punitive measures. So again,
personally, I think that sanctions and more punitive measures are what is needed.
So do I. So we agree. We agree there. We agree. But the point about the statehood being something that you can only you can only pull once, and once you have pulled it, and it looks like we're heading to pull it in September, right? And again, people can doubt the sincerity of Sir Keir Starmer's position on that, and I think that's fair enough, judging by the course of the last couple of years, to doubt his sincerity on certain matters related to this. But once we have pulled that lever and there is no change in policy from the Israeli government, the British government has effectively used the last card in its hand that aren't punitive measures, right? That's something we can at least agree on there.
Well, I'm not sure. There are a lot of measures that the UK could use. I mean, the problem really is that Israel has been accepted as part of the West for so long, despite the fact that it's what it's doing in Palestine and what it's been doing for decades in Palestine really sets it apart from other Western countries, at least in terms of what's happening now. I mean, maybe, in the distant past, countries like Britain and France did the same sort of things in their colonial territories, but they're not doing it now. But Israel is. Israel is an anachronism, really, in the modern world as a settler colonial state, which is trying to enforce, a racial policy and to remove an indigenous population. That isn't happening elsewhere, and yet the West accepts Israel as a normal part of its bloc, effectively. And we have all these economic, political, military links. Britain has a military cooperation agreement with Israel, which was signed 5 years ago, and the Royal Air Force has been carrying out surveillance flights effectively for Israel for 21 months, and the head of the Israeli Air Force, the man who oversees their bombing campaign, was welcomed in Britain at an official event only a week or so ago. We have this level of cooperation with Israel and acceptance of it as a normal state, which really isn't warranted. If a state is committing genocide, you don't deal with it in this way. We wouldn't have dealt with Nazi Germany in this way. We wouldn't have dealt with the Rwandan Hutu power regime in this way. This is not how. We need to start to think in these terms, I think.
Look, I wanted to pull you up on that because, again, you're talking about Israel and the West, and that is something I agree with. But what I disagree with, basically, is that the British government, successive British governments, going back well beyond my lifetime, have been neighbourly, friendly, had good relations with despotic regimes in the Middle East from the start of the Middle East existing as a concept, and actually the British relationship with Israel and Israel's as a state, Israel much more mirrors its autocratic neighbours than Western liberal democracies. It also is tolerated and cooperated with. I will say that again, what Israel's doing in Gaza is unique under the circumstances that you listed, but our relationship with Saudi Arabia, when I say our, I mean Britain's relationship with Saudi Arabia, Britain's relationship with the United Arab Emirates, which is involved in atrocities, that might even amount to genocide in Sudan, hasn't been involved in atrocities in Libya. We're talking about Britain is good friends with the Sisi government, even though they're holding one of our citizens, in prison under completely outrageous circumstances. Britain isn't even willing to apply pressure on the tin pot Sisi dictatorship. So the singling out Israel here as Britain's relationship with Israel as being completely out of this world in response to how Britain should behave. I would say in argument that actually our relationship with all of these Middle Eastern dictatorships have been significantly problematic for many, many decades. And we need to rethink our entire relationship with the Middle East fundamentally, not just with Israel. Again, you can start with Israel, but we need to address the UAE, our Gulf partners, Bahrain. We need to address these countries too. And I think that maybe part of the problem with arguing for much more punitive policies towards Israel is people can point to the hypocrisy and say, well, you're mates with the Sisi junta, so how can you argue that Israel is substantially worse, etc., etc.? And I would argue, going on from your point, that actually our relationship with the Middle East is fundamentally at stake here, and we need to reassess that. And I wouldn't point to Israel and say that it's significantly out of this world different from some of the other relationships that we have with countries that we don't expect any democratic, there's been no pressure from Britain on Saudi Arabia with regards to Yemen. We participated in some of that campaign. So, again...
Well, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I think that there are two reasons why Israel is different. One is I think the nature of the relationship is much closer. The British relationships with the dictatorships and autocratic regimes in the Middle East generally are relationships, despite the fact that they are autocracies. Britain's relationship with Israel is actually an embrace, really, of what Israel is doing, and Israel is committing genocide. I think if we accept that what is happening in Gaza is genocide, this alone puts it in a different category from just about everything else that's going on. Maybe not some of the things that happened in Syria some years back, but what is happening in Egypt and other places that you talked about. So I think really we have to look very hard at this close relationship which Britain, and it's not just a question of Britain really. I understand why we're talking about Britain because we're both British.
Yes, yeah.
But really, it is really a question of Western governments in general, and of course it's a question for other countries too outside of the West, as we might define it. But it is our responsibility because our governments are giving this kind of support for Israel and have done for such a long time, and treating Israel in a different way.
So to finish off, my final question to you, and if you guys have got any final questions in the Twitch chat, please throw them up there. Maybe Dr. Shaw will be kind enough to answer one or two of them. But my final question to you really is policy terms. What would you like to see? Again, we can only really talk about our governments, and we may have more influence over the nature of Sir Keir Starmer's decisions on policy than say we would have any influence in what's going on in Berlin or in Rome or in other parts of Europe, Warsaw, for example. But what would you like to see in policy terms? And again, let's try and acknowledge that Britain is not as influential in the world as us British people tend to believe that we are. But what kind of policies would you like to see implemented by the Starmer government over the next few months, to try and bring about some kind of, pressure on Israel to stop its actions at the very least?
I think that Starmer has to stop soft talking Donald Trump over this. I think Britain has to be prepared to accept some degree of negativity from Trump by breaking much more openly with Israel and its campaign. I think Britain has to not only take the steps like they should be making the recognition of the state of Palestine unilaterally or in conjunction with other partners, but not conditionally on. It should not be. There should not be a question of conditionality in relation to what's going on in Gaza. What's going on in Gaza should be stopped, and really, that has to be a number of different things. I think one is really comprehensively breaking relations with Israel until there is a very radical change in Israeli policy, and until Israel is out of Gaza, until Israel has accepted that this situation that is going on now has to stop and cannot be resumed. I think that we have to have a much more radical sort of pressure, and even at the cost of friction with Trump. I think actually, if enough other countries put serious pressure on Israel and show that they are breaking with what it is doing, then I think Trump maybe will see the way the wind's blowing and will shift a bit as he has on some other issues. But we cannot be in hock to him. He has really become part of this. I mean, his interventions after he came back to power earlier this year have emboldened Israel so much. I mean, if he may now be saying, "Oh dear, it's rather terrible that children were starving in Gaza," but actually his policies have contributed very dramatically to that. It isn't just a question of Israel; it's also a question of what the United States is doing, and we have to. This comes, I suppose, to the question of Europe and European countries. If they want to have a status in the world, they need to actually take their commitments to human rights and international law seriously, and this is a litmus test. And so far, they have failed it very badly.
Well, listen, I wanted to thank you so much. We haven't had any user questions, but I wanted to thank you so much for your time, Dr. Shaw. It was really valuable to hear your insight and perspective on this, to hear your clearly demonstrated arguments and your reasoning behind them without getting involved in a kind of emotional the way these conversations can go. And I really appreciate the respectful tone that it's managed to. Again, I know it's two people largely agreeing with each other and picking on finer points, but I did want to thank you for your time. It was very grateful. And if people wanted to follow more of your work, where would be the best place to do that? I'll put a link to your book, What Is Genocide, in the show notes. But if you had any places,
I have a new book coming out called The New Age of Genocide, which will be out in a couple of months' time. So people might want to watch out for that. But I'm on Twitter, as I still call it, and on Blue Sky, so you can find me in those places. Thank you very much for having me on your show. It's been a really interesting discussion. I haven't managed to look at the chat, so I'm sure there have been lots of good points there, and if I had more time, I would like to address them. But anyway, I hope your listeners get something from this.
We all had a fascinating time. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Shaw, and we really appreciate maybe have you come on the show again sometime. So have a wonderful evening and good night. Take care.
Same to you.
So that was Dr. Martin Shaw. If you're watching along on YouTube, his details will be in the show notes. Sorry for some audio problems that I couldn't really do much to do that. So thank you all for bearing through it. I know that you must have been really engaged in the conversation to listen through all the crackles. So thank you so much for everyone that's following along live. We've got currently 2,000 viewers along Twitch and Twitter, and I put it on Instagram briefly. So thanks to people tuning in to watch the show. Really, really appreciate your support. If you haven't liked or followed along, Please do hit that like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or add me on Twitch. That'd be really, really appreciated. Yeah, I mean, look, again, in response to your question, a random shot in the dark, you have points of contention. There are, again, there were things that I wanted to bring up that I tried to at points. I think it is a valid topic for discussion, and I know that it's emotive, and I know that people struggle to have conversations like these in a calm and respectful manner. And I want to thank you guys for following along and being calm and respectful in the face of what is a difficult topic to discuss. I've learned a lot myself in my older years. The older I get, the more mellow I become. I was a very, very loud, shouty activist, and I didn't stop believing in the causes that I believed in. I just realized that being loud and shouting about them wasn't changing anything, wasn't making me feel better, wasn't making me feel like I was doing anything worthwhile, wasn't actually bringing more people to my cause. I was only ever preaching to people who already agreed with me at the time. So in later years, I've tried to come at things with a more, open-minded approach to some criticism from people that know me as a loud, shouty guy, who are like, why are you not loud and shouting? And, don't get me wrong, I'll still cuss someone out on Twitter or whatever when I have to. But also the bigger following you get, the more time it sucks away from you to just engage with people that disagree with you all the time. And yeah, I don't have the time for it. I'm a full-time journalist. I'm, bringing this show to you. I have a podcast. I have, life outside of all of this too. So I don't want to spend much of my emotional energy and physical time engaging in very loud, shouty, outbursty arguments about, things that I passionately believe in. I passionately believe in addressing the root causes of this conflict. I passionately believe that a Palestinian state is the right and necessary and moral thing to do, and to create. I have friends from all walks of life, from people who I vehemently disagree with on many subjects. And I hope if they are watching in disagreement, they at least try and listen to some of the arguments that have been made with an open mind, and not take it as, a direct attack on their person or their fundamental beliefs, because I don't think we advance anything by doing that. And again, I've spent a lifetime of being someone who did that. And it didn't bring me anywhere. It didn't bring any kind of positive outcome. So, yeah, I'm just doing my best to try and bring about some kinds of discussions that people find substantive, that people find engaging, that people find challenging. I am challenged frequently. I was hoping to bring on a guest a few weeks ago to talk about the assisted dying bill in Parliament. I know British politics doesn't appeal to everyone, but I, as someone personally who as a libertarian, have always thought about the idea of assisted dying as something that I support. I think people should be able to end their own lives if they want to, if they're in pain, some of the arguments I saw from people far to the right of me, politically, socially, culturally, were very convincing. They made me audit my own views. They made me challenge my own views. They made me ask myself difficult questions. At the end of it, I still came out with the conclusion that I support assisted dying. But I really, really did ask myself those questions in a way that I engaged with the substance of what people were saying, even if I disagreed with it objectively. And I've tried to do that with many things in life, with trans rights, with Israel Palestine, with my own beliefs. I wanted to make sure that I at least had a logical consistency for the things that I believe in, and I have done that. I don't shout very much on Twitter about the things that I believe in anymore, because it doesn't change anything really. Who the hell am I to give my opinion? Really, I'm just some guy who happens to be a journalist. So, I can bring much more to a topic by covering it and writing about it in a formative manner and bringing people news than I can by trying to guide their emotions through any kind of art. I'm not that guy. I'm not a hearts and minds guy. I have to acknowledge my weaknesses, right? And they're very much, I'm quite good at rabble rousing and speaking to people who already agree with me, but I'm not a reach out and convince people who don't kind of guy. And I'm trying to be more like that. I am trying to learn and grow and stuff. And you guys are on this journey with me as we try and do that. So what's my thoughts on the online safety bill? Look, so I'll be honest, I haven't really, I don't really know that much about it. I will say that some of it sounds really bad to me. And I think, again, I'm a Labour supporter. People know this, and people may rightly say that I'm too soft on the Labour government. But I do think one of the issues that I have with it, again, as a libertarian, is I don't like this nanny state kind of stuff. And I don't like, the government saying you can't smoke past a certain age. I don't like the more draconian measures. I understand that sometimes bad things happen. And, often in Britain, we have some child being murdered or killed in some awful, awful fashion, and then a policy approach to correct that mistake or situation, which goes so far away from like trying to address the root causes of that, and ends up just infringing on people's personal liberties. So again, I don't speak for British people, who tend to be much more authoritarian than me. British people absolutely loved lockdown. Lockdown was the favorite thing of many people in Britain, because having fun in the United Kingdom is illegal. So personally speaking, I really don't like any of that kind of what I would describe as nanny state kind of government interference in the general conduct of people's lives. Maybe that makes me more of a conservative than I would consider myself, but it's certainly the small government sense, I guess. But look, here I am. Look, you want to come and ask me questions, I'm here to answer questions as best, even controversial ones. I'll do my best. It's tough. It's I don't want people to look at me as some kind of moral paragon anyway. I certainly don't view myself as that. I'm a flawed individual like all of us. So the best that I can try and do for you and for myself is to audit my own beliefs, to try and interrogate them, to try and challenge myself by following perspectives that don't agree or align with mine, or directly contradict mine, and trying to stress test my ideas. Because if my ideas cannot be scrutinized, then they're not very strong to begin with. And again, if you might approach me on Twitter or whatever and throw a question at me in a rude way, and you might get a block, because I don't have the time to engage with everyone all the time. But this is very much a forum like that. So if you have challenging questions you want to ask me, please, by all means, feel free to do so. I will do my best to try and get to them. Let me dive into some of the chat now. I've been talking for a while. Indignant righteousness is still a form of violence, just as war. Yeah, I suppose it is. Thank you, Liquid Amber. Thank you, Noel. Thank you, A Random Shot in the Dark. Thank you, Spazalot, for your contribution to today. I know you said you didn't want to come, but you made it and you listened and you were respectful. So I appreciate you doing that. I just wanted to make sure that was on the record. Thank you, Wheeled Genius, for your question on the online safety bill. I hope I gave a sufficiently interesting answer. The sound was okay in the end for a non-native speaker. With a good speaker, though, it would be interesting to debug sound issues with the guests, see if reducing their input volume. So when he came on to do the sound test, there was no clipping. It sounded fine. And then when the show started, firstly there was an echo, and I couldn't figure out why, so I abruptly ended the show and restarted it. And I was trying to fix multiple problems at once, and the clipping was just something that, because we were already running, it just sort of I didn't know how to address. So again, I'm not a tech expert here, and I am learning the ropes. It's a consistent theme of me apologizing for audio issues. So again, I know it's been at times chaotic, a chaotic experience, not exactly a smooth, polished show yet, but we're like 16 episodes in, right? And we have thousands of viewers now. Again, I know I opened up from Twitch to Twitter to allow more people to come on the show and to watch the show and hopefully boost those. It seems to be working. More engagement is better than just talking to the same like 30-40 people that are in every week. So again, I really appreciate you guys that are in every week and in the chat. And if you're watching on Twitter and you want to get more involved, you have to go onto Twitch and sign up to Twitch and follow me there, and in the chat you can talk to me directly, and we can talk there, and you can ask me any kinds of questions, controversial or not, and I will try and get to them. Just teething problems, Dave from next door says, and par for the course, says Liquid Amber. Thank you. I appreciate it. And Spaz a lot, you did it for me. Thank you. I appreciate all of your your kind words and you sticking through the show despite the bumps that we have along the way. The streamers you watch with years of experience have the same problems. Wow, fair enough. I definitely don't have years of experience, but I will say I am really enjoying this. I am really enjoying talking to you guys the way I am. I'm going to try and get the stream out there to more platforms as I can. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, more people are watching on YouTube than are watching on Twitch mostly. So again, you guys are the main audience. So thank you so much for watching. Our YouTube membership numbers, my subscription followers, has gone up by 200% in the last like 2 and a bit weeks. So that's huge. You can see like we're not even at 600 followers yet at the time of recording. But you can see that like we're a small channel, and so every little bit of interaction you have with us really helps us grow, really helps us break onto people's algorithms. That's really the point of this. When people are like, please like and subscribe, and they do it over and over again, there is a point behind it. Is that they're trying to grow the channel, and I can legitimately say we only have a few hundred followers. So, but we do have guests who are. I'm trying to bring you guests that are of a certain level of caliber and prestige. I'm not bringing you just my mates. I am bringing you many of my mates. I will be clear on that. But I am trying to bring you people that have really interesting things to say, and going to reach out and try and talk to people that have fascinating things to talk about beyond my level of expertise. And that will become apparent. At the moment, I'm kind of in my comfort zone. I'm talking about Israel, Palestine, Syria, talking about Ukraine, talking about British politics. I'm really in my comfort zone at the moment. I do want to push the boat out and challenge. The one thing I also want to do is I want to interact with more streamers. So if you are, if you talk to other streamers, you're on other shows a lot, and you have people that you think maybe we do a good debate or a good collab, that would be great. Please do recommend them. Please recommend me to them, and vice versa. Yes, my mates are pretty cool. Thank you. Thank you so much. And look, again, it's just me doing this. I'm guest booking 3 shows a week. I'm sorting out all of the technical stuff, which it's a mountain. It's been a mountain of stuff I've had to buy. Lights and equipment and another screen, and it has cost a boatload of money. And so when I say, please, if you enjoy the show, please do consider subscribing or going to Patreon or Ko-fi along the way. That really helps us in a big way, because again, it means I can afford to invest that money back into the show. And the more money I get to invest, you'll notice that my webcam got a lot better. So things like that will help the show improve. And what I would like is if we earn a little bit of money, I would like to employ someone, a producer, to be able to cut up little videos and maybe put us on, Instagram and TikTok and YouTube shorts and stuff like that. I'd really like to do that, but it's so much work that I don't have the time to do with my employment, as it were. So if you have enjoyed the show, please do consider giving us a bit of your hard-earned money, because I promise you it will only be used to benefit the show. I'm not expecting this to be a huge revenue stream for myself, but it is something I'm really enjoying. I've really enjoyed it so far, even though we're talking about really difficult topics. So again, you guys are masochists, because you're in here week in, week out listening to us talk about appalling things, but again, you're always respectful and kind, and I'm so appreciative of everyone that's always in the chats, so thank you guys. So yeah, look, that's the end of the show for tonight. We have much more to come tomorrow. We've got James Rushton again live from Kyiv, so we've got Kyiv to Kyiv tomorrow. We're going to be talking about Ukraine, the protest movement against that anti-corruption bill. Both myself and Jimmy were on the streets during those protests. Jimmy's written some really incredible stuff about Ukraine for The Telegraph, so do go check that out. Go check him out on Twitter, Jimmy Sec UK. A Ukraine episode tomorrow. So we're going to go into, if you have any questions about what the hell has happened over these last 2 weeks, me and Jimmy will be here to answer all of them. I've been Oz Katerji. This has been the Oz Katerji Show. Thank you so much for joining and streaming in. Thank you, Spazalot, for praising my cool mates. Thank you, Dave from next door, A Random Shot in the Dark, Liquid Amber, all of you guys that are always here. If you're on YouTube and you're getting jealous of hearing those names, all you have to do is join up on the Twitch chat, and you will be one of those people that I'm reading out to. Again, I don't interact with people often on Twitter and Blue Sky and whatever. I will interact with you here. So if you want to talk to me, this is the medium to get me on. So thank you so much for all of the support. Please do like and subscribe. Please do put some comments. Please do follow along. It really helps us grow. And thank you so much for following on another episode. And I will see you tomorrow night. Good night.